Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is a learner profile brought to you by Codecademy. My name is Elisa. I'm the community manager here at Codecademy. You'll see me on Codecademy's forums, discuss.codecademy.com. You'll see me in the Facebook group, of which Andrew, our guest, is a moderator. Thanks, Andrew. And you'll see us in our new Slack community just for pro users. I'm super pleased to be chatting today with Andrew. He just landed his first job as a software developer. And everybody that we'll feature as part of these learner profile series has taken a twisty-turny path to how they got where they are, and that's what Andrew's here to talk about with us today. So before we get started, I just want to say thanks to everybody who did sign in. I see all the places that you're coming from. I'm so excited to see all of you here with us, and that's so great. There's already some questions coming through, so we're gonna do our best to get all of your questions, and I appreciate them in advance. So, hey Andrew, how you doing?
Pretty good. I just finished my second day.
You just finished your second day on the job.
Yeah, and I'm still alive, so.
You made it. You totally made it, and you have a cute dog to show.
Yeah.
Anybody who was here a few minutes ago might have seen Andrew's cute dog. So tell us what is this role that you just started in this week?
Yeah, okay. The role I started in this week is it's a developer at a company that does document imaging processing, and essentially the role is writing an interface between the framework software, which does the actual processing and the optical character recognition from the documents, and the client who wants something out of the documents, whether it's just the information or some sort of result. So it might be something like credit check, and it either can deny or approve a loan application, but it's along those lines.
Got it. And how did it come to be that this was a job that really that came across your path?
So this, I think, is the most important thing, or one of the, I guess, more unfortunate things too about finding a job. I ultimately got the job through a recommendation from a friend. So networking is really important. I have had some, not offers, but pretty some interviews that progressed far along for data analyst jobs that I didn't know anyone at. But this one I ultimately ended up getting through a friend.
Okay. All right. So you had taken other interviews with other companies,
Mhm.
but this one you happened to get via referral. Okay. So I feel like we've got a good snapshot of where you are today. Day 2, software development. This is so exciting for me. For everybody who's on the line, I mentioned earlier that Andrew is a moderator for our Facebook group. I should have a link for that ready to go. I'll put that in the chat later on. So I've known Andrew. I've been talking with Andrew for a few months now since I started at Codecademy, and I know that he's a go-getter, which is something that I would urge everybody who is learning to code to start to label themselves as. If you're self-teaching, you are a go-getter. You're somebody who's waking up and making it happen, and that was so Andrew. That is so Andrew because because you've been a high school teacher for the longest time. So I think what I'd like to do now with this chat is, like, after taking the snapshot of where you are today, let's go back to the beginning. Where did it? You're teaching high school, or maybe it was before you were teaching high school. When did it occur to you that you were like, I want a technical role?
Well, if we take the really long path, it's back in I guess primary school. I was interested in coding, so I started learning a little bit of BASIC. I learned some HTML, CSS, um, and then I realized that I hated working with computers because they were very frustrating. So I decided to switch away from that ultimately for college. And in college, I pursued a degree in chemistry and ended up getting that. And during that that process, I started learning about computational chemistry. So I ultimately started shifting back towards computing and using computers. So I did some research that involved basically plug and play computational chemistry. So I'd draw a molecule, press some buttons, and it would do the work for me. Then I switched out of that to do some biochemistry stuff, and then back into it after I graduated for a year of a PhD program at Penn State. And that's really where I learned more about high performance computing and ultimately data science and data analytics. Yeah. So I think back then is where I started. Then ultimately, when I ended up leaving the PhD program and getting my master's, I started teaching. And while I was teaching, I felt kind of underutilized and didn't get to use any of the data analysis skills that I had built up during my college years, basically.
I see. And then how did you go from there to teach in high school?
Uh, so from my master's, ultimately, I took two part-time positions. So using some of that HTML and CSS I had learned like years before, I started doing the bulletin and website for a local church for one part-time position, and another was in a computational chemistry lab where I started writing a few scripts that would pull data out of some of those computations and so that they can be analyzed more easily. And then ultimately, again, it was through a referral. Someone I knew was looking for a chemistry teacher, and that was something I was interested in doing. At that point, I wanted to really be a professor at the college level, which you can't really do without a PhD, or at least in science. So I ended up taking that job, and that's how I ended up at the high school.
Okay. But at that point you were still thinking that, well, maybe not.
Well, I had at that point, I guess I was more interested in theoretical chemistry or mathematical physics, which is really where I ended up landing with my master's. Yeah.
So we've got some questions
Mhm.
coming in, and I want to be sure to get to them. Um, so we might be skipping ahead in the story a little bit, but how is it that
Fine.
you came to find Code Academy?
Actually, it's probably about right in the story. So after the first year or so of teaching, I was kind of noticed that I wasn't really that into it. And I did an internship at a notebook company in New York City that was doing paper notebooks, and they actually um, they needed to get lists of small bookstores to sell their notebooks to. And so I had found some sort of API that I was able to search through, and I started writing a bash script to pull it out. And at some point during that internship, someone recommended Codecademy. The two founders of that company actually know the CEO of Codecademy, and they're like, "Oh, why don't you check out that platform?" And so I ended up doing the Ruby on Rails classes through there first, because ultimately at that point I was leaning towards web development.
Ah, okay. So how did you go from leaning towards web development towards having an interest in data science? Because I think that's an important part of the story that we need to touch
Yes.
on. We started at student, hardcore student,
Yeah.
got to high school teacher, skipped forward ahead to where you are today as a software developer, but in between, you were also working as a data scientist.
Yeah. So how did I get there? Let's see. So I guess at that point, I was really trying to figure out what I wanted to do. It came down to, I guess, three paths. One of my friends from Penn State was really trying to convince me to consider stats or data science at that time. Web development, because I was familiar with it. The notebook company really had a heavy focus on design. So I like doing design and working on things like that. So that was something I was considering doing as well. And the last thing was consulting. And that's something I might end up doing down the road. But just between those three, that's what I was trying to choose between. And ultimately, I think I felt with the background that I had and my overall interests, data science was really the place to focus. So at that point, I actually started applying to data science boot camps. And I think that's when I started taking the Codecademy Python class because I needed to learn Python really fast in order to start doing those. So I did the Python class in about, I guess, 2016. So it's been a few years now.
Got it. Sorry, I am gonna play with the mute button here so that we're not flipping back in your face and mine for everybody who's here. Okay, so ultimately that's where you were. I think yeah. So there's some interesting questions coming through right now. Andrew, do you want to keep going with your story, or do you want to hit some questions that are coming through?
We can go through questions.
All right. The question that I saw was, what path did you learn in Codecademy? Like, what path did you start with? And maybe you didn't start with a path. I know you said that you started with Ruby, of course.
Yeah, so for Codecademy, honestly, I think I started before they had paths because those, if I'm not mistaken, those are pretty recent.
Okay, yeah.
So I did start on what I guess would be the precursor of the web development path because I did do the Ruby series of things, but then I ended up switching to what would be the data science path. And I'm still actually working through that now to kind of brush up as I go through. But I started with Python and then started learning SQL or SQL, however you want to call it, over the past couple of years. Yeah.
I got a really good question here. And I think this question I'm going to ask to you, Andrew, but also I'd love to have everybody else who's on the line answer this question too. On average, how many hours per day did you commit to your studies? Keeping in mind you had a full-time job the whole time.
Yeah. When I was going through the Codecademy classes, and actually probably for the most part overall, whenever I was free during the day, between classes or whatever break, I would spend that time doing the Codecademy lessons. And I tended to, so we were done at like 3:00, and I tended to stay until about 5. And it wasn't always doing Codecademy. Sometimes it was grading or planning ahead or making a test or quiz. But I guess probably a couple hours a day. I think the main thing though was focused practice rather than sitting and staring at it for 3 hours a day just to get to 3 hours a day.
What does focus practice look like?
I think the best way I would put it is it's when you're actually paying attention to the task that you're trying to go through. So you're actually thinking about what you're doing, asking why. If you have something in Python, like maybe a generator, you might ask, why am I doing it this way? Or why do I put this in this order? And making sure that you can kind of answer those questions, or at least maybe put down your next to-do list. So maybe after practicing today, I'll look up why things are this way. That it's one of those active learning techniques that keeps you focused and spending not spending the time right, but keeping your mind engaged in the activity. So it's not just the equivalent of trying to study for a chemistry test while watching The Office on Netflix, which is something that happens a lot.
It's a strategy. Oh.
Yeah, unfortunately, that doesn't really lead to the outcome that you want, because then you can still say, oh, I spent 3 hours studying last night, but I wasn't really paying attention. So I think really the main thing that the way I learned the most was actually doing projects. And I really started focusing on doing more projects over the past year and a half. And aside from the referral, for this job, the being a go-getter, because that was something that kind of came across in how I presented myself at the interview. And that was actually something they mentioned when they were saying things they liked. Doing the actual projects and having something to say, oh, look, I can do these things is super important. And really that's where you learn the actual real life aspects.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to come back to two really important points that you've made so far. Projects being one of them. I want to talk about that. Let's make you or me, one of us, make a note to come back to projects. And networking is also something that I want to be sure to come back to. But for right now, I without getting too personal, I think I'd like to also make it clear that you didn't just have a full-time job. You also have a life, right? Like you have other projects and stuff.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
have
know if you
a
want
lot of
to share
stuff.
you got a lot of stuff going on. I don't know if you want to share anything about that or if you just want to say, I got a lot.
Um, I think I do too much, so maybe don't do as much as I try to do. But I also don't, I guess, realize that I do as much as I do, because even like on the last day of classes, when I was telling my students where I was going, I think after the first class, I had to actually stop and say, wow, I do way too much. I don't know how I have any time to do anything. So I guess one of the main projects that I started, and it was really trying to start a business. There was something called the News Unspun, and it was a data project with, I guess, a human component as well. The main idea being it was going to be a newsletter that you can have with maybe like 5 stories a day, so that if you're a working professional and you only have 5 minutes to read the news in the morning, you'd be up to date and you can have an actual informed conversation. So the main thing that I ended up spending my time on before it became a task of writing was an aggregator that would take news stories, take the topics, and use natural language processing techniques, which I still haven't had a chance to check out the Codecademy class on, but that's on my to-do list because this is an area that I really love. But but I was using those techniques to basically categorize articles by topic, and then it would send an email out to the writers. And actually, there's still a website that sort of semi-exists that is updated actually every 4 times a day. But that was a project where I really learned a lot. I learned a few things that are important. One was it was a real life project, so I had to deal with real data streams. Not every RSS feed that I tried to use is formatted the same way. There's standardization issues that you have to kind of deal with that you wouldn't see necessarily in a course, because a lot of courses are trying to just get you the techniques, and the quote that everyone likes to give, or the stat everyone likes to give, is data science is 80 to 90% data cleaning and data wrangling. And that's the part that is the most frustrating, and you probably don't spend the most, you don't really learn too many techniques how to do it outside of a project. And the other end was, because we were trying to grow a business, or start it as a business, I learned a lot about what the business side is actually interested in. So in data science and data analysis in particular, that's really the most important part. People don't really care if you found something interesting if it has no business aspect, at least if they're trying to pay you to do it. And I think that's something that's really important. Another thing is being able to communicate those ideas in a way that someone who doesn't have the technical background um, can understand and follow.
Sorry, the mute thing again.
Okay.
Have you found any resources to help be that person who can speak to a more non-technical person?
Uh, I haven't really tried to look, um, but I do have a recommendation. So I'll explain why I haven't tried to look first. Main thing being that I'm pretty much always trying to explain complicated things to people. And especially as a teacher, I really had 5 years of hands on practice of trying to explain the same thing in sometimes 10 different ways to a class of students. So I haven't really needed to focus on that part. But just in speaking and answering questions in general, I found Toastmasters International to be a really good program. Um, I know I've mentioned it a few times to you, but essentially there are two main components. There's three. There's leadership, then there's public speaking, and within public speaking, you have prepared speeches, and then you have something called table topics, where it's an impromptu question that you have to stand up and talk about for 1 to 2 minutes. So it helps you think on your feet. And with the prepared speeches, you're learning how to organize thoughts and how to present them to an audience. And for the most part, especially if you're joining a community club, you're trying to explain it to people who don't have the same background as you. And I think that's probably the best way to do it, because then afterwards people can say, well, I didn't understand this, or I didn't understand that. And I guess the benefit of Toastmasters is it's supposed to be a safe environment to do it, where everyone's trying to really help each other out with their speaking and their leadership. And for me, I kind of knew the target for what level of technical information to give. And that was just because I was really doing that on a daily basis. The main thing it helped me with was within maybe 2 meetings, I felt way more confident answering questions at interviews. And it definitely made me feel a lot less nervous doing this.
For example.
Yeah.
All right. So there was a really good question that came in from somebody named Mark earlier. We're bouncing around a little bit, but I'm doing my best to get to everybody's questions. Um, the question was, as a self-teacher or like a self-taught learner, how did you continue to motivate yourself when you encountered certain concepts and functions that you really struggled with?
That's a really good question. Let's see. There's a couple of ways you can do it. I think I have a decent story that I'm not supposed to know about. But at one point, when I went back for my master's, I ended up using the one of the computers my advisor wrote my recommendation letter on. So I got to see that. There was something in there that I totally agreed with. And it was, you basically have to step on me to get me to do anything. So you need some sort of like accountability. So whether that's maybe I'm spending this money on this class, so I better do it just because otherwise it's a waste of money. It could be someone who's in the course helping you. So in the data science boot camp, I ended up finally finding someone to kind of work with, and the two of us kind of pulled each other along. Really, I think for me, the main thing was picking projects that I was actually interested in. So the News on Spun came about because it was something that I wanted to provide good information to people. And so it was something I was passionate about. The other things that we're working on with some of our friends, or that I'm working on with some of my friends, it helps to one have them. So with the News Unspun, it wasn't just me as well. So even if I was tired or didn't want to work on it that day, I had to answer to someone else basically. Another thing that my group of friends is working on is a nonprofit to basically give out grants to people who are looking to try and change careers and or start a company that's community focused. So it's essentially a nonprofit to provide a small grant to people who were like me and my friend. Both of us were trying to change careers into different things, but also start a business that had some sort of broad benefit to society. So that passion and wanting to know the answer or wanting to finish, I think, are the main things that drove me. But it could be as simple as, well, money's tight. So if I spend whatever it is per month for Codecademy Pro, that's enough of a reason for me to actually go through or spend at least as much time as I can without, trying to kill yourself, because you don't want to burn out either. But at least that way, it's some sort of accountability.
Got it. Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. I think finding what mm, about each and every person, finding what makes you accountable, and then leaning into that. It sounds like for you, it was some mix
Yeah.
of put in some cash up front and making a few friends.
Yeah.
So in the we're gonna get back to one of the important points that I wanted to. So I think there's a decent segue there from making a few friends. Um, One of the questions was, how would you recommend finding contacts and building a network of acquaintances?
Okay. That is probably my worst area, but I do have suggestions anyway.
I don't know about that, Andrew.
Well, I mean, the person I found this job through, I've been friends with since high school, so that's not going to always be the case for everyone. But there are other things that I've done. For instance, I'm pretty active in the Codecademy community, so um, it doesn't for me. It wouldn't necessarily. It'd be more like I guess if someone in the community wanted to talk to me, they could. I might be able to help them at least with some of the questions they might have or direct them along the way. But there are still other people who might, if you work together, you might find one of them gets a job and then there's another opening. Meetup is a really good site for um, finding people who have common interests. It could be like a data science meetup. I've heard that some of them are hit or miss, though. I haven't actually had the chance to go to any, but that's a place that people find others who are interested in web development, software development, data science, and pretty much anything. Um, I started writing blog posts on Medium. So medium.com is a place that you can, I guess, basically write blog posts. I was fortunate in that one of my first articles was picked up by Towards Data Science, which is a data science publication. So they picked up my first one. I wrote a couple more, and then I ended up volunteering there as a editorial associate. So I guess using my experience working at the church doing their website, and I did the bulletin. I don't know if I mentioned that too. So I had edited plenty of things over time. So that gave me some contacts in data science because now I was reading submissions from people who are in the field or people who are trying to get into the field and making connections that way. So I ultimately, for one of my articles on deep learning, I ended up having it reviewed by someone who was doing their PhD or is doing their PhD at, I think, UC Santa Barbara. No, that's not right. I don't know, one of the UC schools. I forget which. And he ended up actually being from New Jersey and like 2 towns over from me. And then someone else who I think was in Indonesia. So those are people that I met through actually through Twitter for the first one, and Towards Data Science for the second. I ended up reviewing the second person's article, and I said, "Hey, would you take a look at mine and be a technical reviewer on mine?" So I made connections that way too.
Oh, that's awesome. So you put yourself out there. You
Yeah.
asked for people's feedback. That's great. I mean, I think it, I'm in a pretty fortunate position where, yes, I know you, Andrew, but I also hear these stories from others too. And I think that that's a major aspect of this is being that person who's asking for feedback. And then just also, too, I want to share that, here at Code Academy, that's something that everybody's doing all the time. Kind of putting
Yeah.
themselves out there and asking for that feedback. That's great. Okay, back to the question. Oh, I really like this one. And you guys, I'm really sorry about the bouncing around, but until I figure out some wonderful formula for how to get to the questions and go in a straight line path, we're going to bounce around. Uh, when did you know that when do you know that you're ready to work in programming?
I think the answer, at least in my case, is you don't. I learned a lot from trying to apply, like what sort of things that companies were looking for and what things I didn't know. Um, so I probably, if I had to estimate, I definitely applied for over 100 jobs over the past like 3 years. So it was a lot of effort, and I started applying way before I really probably should have. But at the same time, it gave me something to figure out as a next step, what skills I had or didn't have, because I was doing, I think, okay on the phone interviews. Um, there were some where I went in person, and then I think I maybe was missing something technically, or there was just someone who was more prepared, or not more prepared, but someone who maybe had a degree in computer science. Um, that's something that I guess as an alternative path person you're going to have to face. You might be qualified for the job, but you might not get it because you don't have a degree from a university, even though you can do the work. But I think I constantly doubt how good I am at doing things. So I would say you would, for me at least, I never knew when I was ready to start. I just, I guess, decided to start doing it. And I started applying immediately after the boot camp, and I was definitely not ready. And I know for a fact now that I had no clue what I was doing. I'm still pretty sure I have no clue what I'm doing, but I know a lot more than I did then. So that's, I think, something that will always be the case. You probably never feel prepared, but being someone who's taken the time to actually put in the effort to learn all the material, you at least know that you have that on your side. So if you don't know something, like actually for the job I have, the main languages that they use are JavaScript and C# and .NET, and I know barely any JavaScript. I know no C#, but I know I can learn them. So I know Python. I know Python pretty well, and I know that it translates. The ideas translate very well from one language to another.
I think that's such a good point. Getting to a point where you've learned enough to know how to learn so that when you're faced with something that you know that you can learn it. I think that's major, if not very confusing. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that is probably one of the most important things, and that's always what I tried to present as my best attribute when I was interviewing, is that I like to learn and I am good at learning.
Yeah, learning is a skill, and I think we need to talk about it as such. So you mentioned that when you got out of the boot camp, and I'm sure that there's a number of people on the line who have considered a boot camp also. I'm curious, was it projects that you worked on that was the main differentiator between where you were at the end of boot camp and job readiness? What closed the gap for you?
Yeah, I think it was projects, and at that point, I had a couple of years more experience in the field too. I think the main thing I got out of the boot camp was an idea of what there is or what exists in data science. Um, but I guess also to be fair, I should probably explain my background going into the boot camp. Um, so I had pretty much just learned Python going in, and this particular boot camp was really for people who have master's and PhD degrees and are trying to switch into data science. So they really kind of expected you to know programming pretty well. And they were really trying to just give you the tooling for switching to data science. So almost everyone else in the program had a master's or a PhD in computer science or something like that. Um, so one of my biggest struggles was just the getting used to Python and using it. But at the same time, I think you have to spend a certain amount of hours really trying to get familiar with the language before you're ready. So I think for the boot camp, I got a good overview of what there is. I got some ideas of what kind of projects you could do because there were many projects that I had to complete. But I think doing real world projects that I was interested in was really the main thing that made me feel a lot more ready. Um, because I think I kind of mentioned, or as I mentioned before, there's a lot of data wrangling that I didn't have to do in the boot camp that you do have to do in the real world. There's a lot of deciding about what you're actually going to do and what the problem statement is that you have in a project that you're creating or just making up rather than in a course. So those I think were the places to really learn. And I mean, even within data wrangling, or data engineering, which is a whole nother facet of data science, that's something I hadn't even really thought about or considered dealing with until I started recently working with a startup as a data science as one of the other things that I'm doing.
No big deal.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay. All right. So we talked about data science. We talked about the things you didn't expect. We've got like 7 more minutes left. So I'm gonna go back to our question list. And there was one question that I stop me if we already basically covered this, but where do you find projects to work on?
Sorry, I was having a hard time hitting the unmute button.
I have a hard time too. It's like a red button, and yet it's difficult to press.
It kept disappearing when I tried to hit it. Uh, um, where do you find projects? There are tons of lists out there that are recommended projects, and you can go through any of those. I like doing things the hard way, apparently. And my first project, the first article that I wrote for Towards Data Science, or the one that got picked up, was about CEO compensation. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal that had said, "Oh, there's no gender pay gap because female CEOs ended up with a higher median salary than male CEOs, even though there were I think 23 out of the top 500 at the time." So I said, "Well, I know that's wrong because I know that I'm just kind of knowing domain knowledge. CEOs are paid basically the bigger the company, the more they make. So I was like, well, it's probably just that the female CEOs are at bigger companies. So ultimately, figuring out the problem statement for that is, can I make a model from just giving the size of the company, or rather, given just the size of the company, can I predict the CEO's pay? And I was more or less able to do that. So that was my target. So in retrospect, I could have done a lot more, but those are the things you learn over time. But that was the first starting point. Other projects I've done were.
Well, where did you find it? I guess that one you didn't. That one was your own. Like you just
Right.
that you were gonna crunch those numbers.
Where do you like? Where did I find that one, or the other ones that I've done?
Maybe the other ones.
For the most part, most of the ones that I've done have been along the same lines.
Like real world
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
That sounds interesting to me, honestly.
It makes it harder, but for me, it also made it more interesting and something I wanted to actually complete. There's tons of tutorials out there that you could follow. I get like probably a million emails a day with different places that you could go. If you really just search data science projects or projects, one of the first things that people like to do is write articles about the different projects that you could do or places to find those resources. So I think for me, they were mostly things that were interesting or questions that I had or questions that someone asked. Another project I did had to do with partisanship in Congress. So I just scraped Congress's the web pages for the House and Senate and tried to plot how many members of each party there were.
Huh.
But that was mostly trying to answer a question of, has Congress really been more like seat wise? Has it become more polarized or less? And it's actually less.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's been about 50% for probably the past couple decades.
Okay, we can talk about that.
Yeah, but it's mostly trying to answer questions that I found interesting.
Got it.
The News Unspun was another huge project, but same idea.
So you mentioned earlier talking about deep learning a little bit. This is a question from the learner Lucifer's Wrath, and I don't know. Just say next if we can't answer this one. But question was, I'd honestly like to know, how do I move machine learning to deep learning and OpenAI?
I don't know.
Okay, that's fair. But I asked.
Yeah, I mean, I think just kind of broadly, I can at least talk about the difference real quick. I would think of machine learning and deep learning as two different areas, even though they're very much related. You could really learn one without the other. With regards to OpenAI, I'm not sure how to do it, but
Okay. Thanks for that. It looks like for anybody who got here late, I'm on the line with Andrew. We have like 60 more seconds left. Andrew is from the New York metropolitan area. Accurate? Or
yep.
did we just say okay? And he just started this week in his new role as a software developer. So let me take a look real quick. Oh, I liked this question too. What language or languages are needed to build scripts?
Kind of depends on what you want to do. I started out with Bash scripts. So basically Linux terminal scripts using like awk and sed and grep. And I would never want to do that again because it was so much more challenging. I like Python because it's a rapid prototyping language, so it's fast to write scripts. But JavaScript works. I've actually, for when you answer the questions for the Facebook group for Codecademy, I originally had a Python script that pulled out all the answers to the questions, and then I had to switch it to JavaScript so everyone else could use it. But Python, JavaScript, those are probably the two most common, I would say, scripting languages.
Okay.
But it just kind of depends on what you want to do. JavaScript you can do on the web or in a browser. Python you can do it, but you need some sort of environment to run it.
Got it. And well, more or less along those lines, do you need to take math courses to successfully become a developer? And if so, what do you recommend? The person is asking because they haven't been in touch with math for a while.
To be a developer broadly, I don't think so. To be a data scientist, yeah. And if so, definitely linear algebra, because pretty much all of the algorithms use linear algebra. You can kind of get if you've ever taken a calc class, or even if it was a long time ago, you probably are familiar with the basic ideas for like gradient descent, which is basically following the slope down the hill. And that's really all you need to know about it. But if you don't have some understanding of linear algebra and statistics, it'll make it harder to do data science. That being said, I've also never taken stats, so.
Sorry, I was on mute. Anyway, okay, cool. We'll have to talk about stats. I took stats for public health. I took it a few times. It's interesting stuff. Okay. One question was, will the video be up after we finish today? Yes, absolutely. Thanks for asking. It'll be on Codecademy's YouTube channel. What else have we got here? Lucifer's Wrath. We did. He to the best of his ability. Andrew tried to answer the question, more talking about like the nuance between machine learning, deep learning. So check out the recording and rewind back. Also, if anybody wants to join the Facebook group, I just put a link to it here, and Andrew hangs out there with us too. So, Andrew, I don't want to volunteer any of your time, but if you're there and somebody asked you a question, I bet you'd.
Yeah, I think mentoring is definitely important. I have no idea how you find a mentor, but eventually that's something I will do. I can do some now, but I'm still not really an expert.
Well, you're an expert in getting this far.
Yeah.
Which is great. Okay. So I think I've got, oh, last one. Did you make a portfolio to share?
Yes.
Not to share with us, but just like, did you have one?
Yes.
Make one. Okay.
I mean, it's available. You could check it out. It's dakotasmorrow.ml. I assume that my name is somewhere
Okay.
on the YouTube thing.
Oh, is it? I think we might have just put your first name.
Well, it's out there. There's only one of me, so you can probably try and search me.
One more reason to join the Facebook group.
Yeah.
True. Find his projects. All right. We're like 4 minutes over what we expected, but this was awesome. For everybody who is on, thank you so much for joining. I hope you had fun. I had fun. Andrew, obligatory. You had fun? No,
Yeah.
I'm just joking. Do we get to see Jasper again before we sign off?
No, I think he's downstairs. My wife came home at some point in the middle.
Oh, well, that's nice. He has a friend downstairs. Jasper's the dog for anybody here. All right. I put a link in the chat to fill out a survey about this. The more information that we have about what works and what's helpful for everybody here, the more of these we can do and the better that they'll be. I think today's was great. Thank you, Andrew, so much for sharing. You might be a software developer by trade, but you're still a teacher here today because you just shared a whole bunch with people, and I really, really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Totally. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Bye.